Welcome to Generation AI, the show where we explore how AI is reshaping our generation. I'm Derek Staahl. On the show today, will Chinese open-weight models empower hackers and criminals? We'll talk with an expert about the concerns and whether there's any way to rein in these models that are offered for free online. Plus, Waymo is growing and so are the glitches, with the number of cars up 5x compared to last year. We're seeing more problems on the roads. So how can the company fix it, and is there enough government oversight? First, let's get straight to the headlines. On the heels of revelations about rogue AI agents hacking companies, researchers say they've detected a new level of autonomy and deception from some of the leading AI models. The UK's AI Security Institute found AI agents from Anthropic and OpenAI created fake human profiles to try to trick people in attempted cyber attacks. In the most serious case, Anthropic's Mythos tried to gain access to a service called GitHub by using fake profiles to send private messages to people, and then the AI hid the evidence. This happened during testing when the normal safeguards on the model had been reduced or removed, but the Security Institute says it's concerning because these agents took actions that were well beyond what they were tasked to do. Scientists have just created 16 new viruses not found in nature using AI, and it could set the stage for some major medical advances, but it's also sparking concern about what this technology could do in the wrong hands. Researchers at Stanford and the Ark Institute created an AI model to recognize patterns in DNA, and then they used the model to write recipes for entirely new viruses. They wound up creating 16 viruses that have never existed before in nature. Now, fortunately, these viruses cannot infect humans, only bacteria, and they can kill E. coli, which is a good thing. It's important as bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. The researchers have made this AI model open source, which means it's free for others to download, but they say they were careful to train the model in such a way that it won't be able to create viruses that are dangerous and might infect humans. Lastly, there's an idea out there to stop students from using AI to cheat. It's coming to us from Denmark. Teenage students in that country are now required to verbally defend any assignments they write at home. In class, schools are now required in Denmark to use tools to monitor students' screens and use firewalls to limit what content the students can access. These are new government regulations coming from the country's Ministry of Education, which is also encouraging more in-school work, less at-home assignments. So far, the major teacher and student groups in Denmark have welcomed the change. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if it can be adopted here. Well, coming up, Chinese AI models are catching up to the big American labs. Will those models make it easier for hackers and criminals? And is there anything we can do to stop it? We'll talk with Andrew Yoon of Civ AI when Generation AI returns. Welcome back to Generation AI. Chinese open-weight models appear to be catching up rapidly to the frontier systems from American companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, and that has a lot of people in the industry concerned. That's because these Chinese models don't have the same safety guardrails that are designed to stop bad guys from using these tools for things like hacking or building bioweapons. Systems like Kimi K3, GLM 5.2, QEM 3.8, they're what's called open-weight models. We talked a little bit about this last week. Open-weight models are free to download, and you can modify them. So a very motivated, skilled person could potentially adjust or remove any safeguards that come with these systems. My next guest is the head of research at the nonprofit Civ AI, Andrew Yoon. Welcome to Generation AI.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. So let's start with kind of the state of the race at the moment. How close would you say the latest Chinese open-weight models are to the leading closed-source models from OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera?
It very much depends how you measure it. What we've seen over the last year or so is a pretty steady trend of open-weight models lagging closed frontier models by around 4 months, according to different ways you can measure it. I think measurements don't tell the entire story. You'll often hear these announcements come out, say like Qwen 3.8 Max beats Opus 5 according to all these different benchmarks, and you go and you try it out in the real world, and it just like doesn't meet up to those expectations. And so I always try to caution people, when we say 4 months, this is 4 months according to a suite of tests that we've put together, but tests don't always tell the complete story here. It very well could be more like 6 months or even 8 to 12 months. depending on what exactly we're looking at here.
Is it getting harder to measure the model capabilities as these models get smarter and smarter?
Absolutely, yeah. So a great metaphor or way to think about this is like doing a job interview. So if I'm doing a job interview, I want to test some candidate who's trying to apply to work with my organization, and maybe I ask them to do some practice problems, or I ask them to like talk about their work history. And using this kind of interview process, it's pretty easy to tell like who's obviously a bad candidate. There's like cases where someone's clearly just floundering, and this is like clearly not going to work out, sorry. But when you kind of reach the upper levels of capability where you're like, okay, this person's like really good, clearly, but I actually have like 5 people who are really good, and they're all like roughly matching the same vibes of excellence. Actually being able to rank these in order of saying like this one's definitely the best and this one's definitely second best and third best, this is actually very difficult and very subjective. And so it's the case that as you get more and more advanced with these models, it becomes harder and harder to measure how good they are, especially relative to one another. And if you look at research from like Anthropic and these other labs, they have been talking about this a lot lately, that a lot of the benchmarks that they use to test and evaluate models are becoming what they call saturated, where saturated means everything across the board, these new models are all performing like 90% or more on these tests. Everybody's acing the test, more or less, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to discern how capable they are. And so what needs to happen is you need to make more and more complicated tests, but the models are getting good so fast that people who develop these tests cannot keep up.
Wow.
And so the kind of tests that we have data on just are not really measuring at the full level of capabilities that we are interested in here.
Wow. Now, I mentioned off the top that these open weight models, people could download them. They could potentially change the model characteristics, maybe take away any sort of safeguards that are in there. There was also some research done on one Chinese model in particular, GLM 5.2, that found you don't even have to download it or modify the model to get it to help you with the kinds of requests that a hacker would make. You could just ask it through the API system. Are there any sort of policy interventions that could help rein in these open weight models?
There are a lot of things we can do. I will say out of the box, models like GLM 5.2 definitely have weaker guardrails than, say, Claude or ChatGPT. They do have some guardrails. If I go to GLM 5.2 and I say, how do I commit a terrorist attack? It's going to say, no, I'm not going to help you out with that. But the modification part here becomes very important, because the fact that these models are open weight means that anybody can download them, and it's pretty easy, even for people who are not machine learning researchers, to go and strip away all of these guardrails so that they will help you go and do some pretty heinous crimes. So we do see that there's a difference there, where the models that are completely out of the box are somewhat safer, and then you can go and modify them to remove the guardrails and make them completely dangerous.
But okay, so if anybody can download it and theoretically run it if they have the right hardware, what can we do? I mean, what sort of interventions are there?
So there are a few things. One, it was considered recently, the Trump administration has been putting together some guidelines, a testing regime of sorts for closed models. And the idea here is before OpenAI releases a new model, they have to submit it to the government and ask them to go put it through some tests and find out, is this model, as you are planning to ship it to the general public, capable of doing cybercrime? And if the answer is yes, you're not allowed to release it. You have to go and tighten up your defenses before you can release it. So there was consideration that maybe open weight models should be included in this, but it's actually very difficult in the open weight context, because the open weight model ecosystem is very fragmented. There are thousands and thousands of these open weight models. We hear about just like the top 5 or so, Kimi, Quen, GLM, DeepSeek, but there's actually a huge zoo of these models out there. And if you wanted to have some kind of testing regime that would apply to all of these, you would need to seriously scale up whatever kind of testing approach you're using. And you would also need to answer the question of what happens if the models are already out there? Who are you requiring to do these tests if they're just putting it on the internet? So this is actually very difficult. There are some more intermediate interventions that we can do. For instance, if I want to run GLM 5.2, I actually can't do it on my own computer. GLM 5.2 requires some very expensive hardware. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars to put together a computer that's able to run GLM 5.2. So I'm not able to go and run this at home. But what I have to do instead is go to a provider. There's a bunch of companies, they're cloud companies, and what they let you do is they'll run GLM 5.2 for you, and you can just pay them by the token to make your requests. So this is a point where we can intervene, and we can say, hey, companies, if you want to go and host an open weight model, and you want to allow just like random people on the internet to go and ask whatever kinds of questions they want, you have to have some kind of guardrails placed on top of the model. Because guardrails can exist at multiple levels in the model stack. So you have, at the lowest level, you have the model itself. And this model might have some moral compass that's been trained into it that says, I'm not going to help with X, Y, or Z. But you have the problem where someone could remove the guardrails in that case. So what you can do on top of that is you have another layer here, and this is called classifiers. Or monitors. So you have another AI that's kind of watching the stream of the chat here. When you ask a question, when you ask a question, it's like kind of supervising the chat. It's checking in every few words or maybe every single word and checking like, is anything bad going on here? Do I need to cut this off? You can have another AI kind of watching this and pulling the plug when things are going sideways. And this is actually done today at like ChatGPT and Claude. When you ask a question, not only do they have the model itself checking and refusing requests, but if the model itself fails and allows a harmful request to go through, they will shut it down by the second layer of defense. And so what we can do is require model providers who host open weight models to actually go and apply guardrails in this manner.
Those are some fascinating potential interventions. You mentioned at the top that the Trump administration has been working on this framework for the closed models, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. But it sounds like from reporting that they have specifically exempted the open weight folks. Do you think that's a good idea?
I don't know if it's necessarily a good idea. I think it's definitely understandable. I think we have to consider how you would actually go ahead and implement this. There's a separate question here, like when we're talking about this testing framework that the administration has been considering. This testing framework applies to companies who are both the developers and the companies serving the models. So OpenAI develops their models, they own the weights, and they're responsible for serving it. OpenAI is in charge of the entire stack here. If we're talking about open weight models, this isn't actually what happens. You have like a company called like DeepSeek or something, and they develop the model. They do some hosting of the model, but they also release the weights so that other people can host the model. And so the question would be, if we have this testing regime, is this applying to the people who are trying to serve the models, or is it applying to the people who are trying to release the weights of the models? And then what do you do if the weights get released anyways? Because these companies are in China. They don't have to follow US regulations. If the Trump administration has some kind of regulation saying, DeepSeek, you have to do this testing, DeepSeek is going to say, OK, didn't ask. I'm just going to do this anyways. And so you would need is some kind of agreement with China, which we think is probably a good idea, that neither country, the US or China, releases weights to models that are above some kind of capability threshold where it can be easily repurposed for significant harm.
Well, we do have President Trump meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping next month. So we'll see. Maybe this will come up, this issue of open weights models.
And Xi Jinping has been on the record here. Well, I don't know about Xi specifically, but the Chinese government, it is known that they're considering restrictions like this already because they know that this is bad too. China doesn't want to have people making bioweapons either. And they can see the writing on the wall that, Kimi K3 is probably okay, GLM 5.2 is probably okay, but the next generation of models and the next generation of models, we have this idea in our heads now that like Claude Mythos is here. And this was announced in April. This is an extremely powerful model. There's new models from OpenAI that are extremely capable at hacking. And if you had an open weight model at that level of capability, it would be an absolute Pandora's box situation. Yeah. And we want to avoid that by as well as we can.
No doubt. And if the trends continue, we may only be 4, 6, 8 months away from that potentially. So it's a fascinating time. Andrew Yoon is the head of research at Civ AI. Andrew, please come back to Generation AI. That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Still much more here to come. Coming up, Waymo is expanding, and it seems to be encountering more glitches and edge cases in the process. We'll talk with an expert about how the company can respond. Generation AI continues after this. Welcome back to Generation AI. Driverless robotaxi services are expanding faster than ever. This week, Amazon's Zoox vehicles started offering paid rides in Las Vegas. And in the last month, Waymo went fully driverless in 4 more cities. Waymo has quintupled the number of vehicles it now has on the road compared to last year. But as these companies expand, they're encountering more of what they call highly unusual events. These could be disruptions or even novel circumstances, edge cases that the model may not have been trained to handle. In June, we just saw a video of a Waymo in Phoenix driving by a police perimeter near Sky Harbor as police were searching for an armed suspect. And then that was San Francisco, where Waymos got caught in 4th of July crowds last month, blocking traffic for hours and hours. My next guest is a former Google executive who serves as an expert witness in tech cases. Istvan Janyar, welcome to Generation AI.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So some critics say companies like Waymo are really focused on expanding first and then fixing the problems later. Based on the way these AI systems learn, is expansion the only way to solve these unusual cases?
Well, expansion is the way to encounter the unusual cases. When you have 10 cars out, what's the likelihood that highly unusual cases will be encountered by these robots? Once you have millions of these out, or hundreds of thousands of them, and they are driving millions and millions of miles, that's when you start seeing the highly unusual cases occur. So to some extent, you do have to expand for the statistics to start working in your favor. Google has a town that they built where they can hermetically test in conjured up scenarios after they have already tested everything in simulation before they bring the taxis out into the real world. But there are only so many things you can even imagine that could happen for you to stage in those cities.
In terms of Waymo's strategy to deal with these unusual cases, does the car ever sort of phone home to get help?
Well, the car is in constant contact with home. As soon as it powers on, it has sort of a data link, and it uploads everything that it's doing, where it is, all the steering inputs. And if it encounters a situation that it does not know how to handle, then the attention of a remote operator is hailed. And I believe there are about 70 remote operators in the Phoenix area who serve all of the cities for Google. And so not every single vehicle is monitored throughout the entire ride. These operators are focusing on the edge cases.
I want to show you a statement that Waymo just gave us a few minutes ago and get your reaction to it. So they tell us the data demonstrates that the Waymo driver is over 10 times safer than human drivers in the cities we serve. It is designed to autonomously navigate the entire task of driving, responding to both the everyday and the extraordinary events that naturally occur when driving millions of miles a week. Crucially, as our fleet scales and total miles increase, our rate of events per mile continues to decrease. And what they're saying there basically is while the, sort of the total number of highly unusual events are increasing as a, sort of raw number, they're saying that as a function of the miles, if you convert it to a rate, they're running into fewer and fewer of these. Help me understand that. What's your take on that?
Right. So all they are saying is that per miles driven, robotaxi is encountering fewer adverse events than a human. A human average is about 700,000 miles per serious accident, as far as I recall, and maybe a couple 100,000 per minor incidents. And they are looking at how many miles these robotaxis are driving and how many incidents they are encountering. And so it's a quite simple calculation. It's a number of incidents divided by the number of miles driven. The interesting thing, though, here is that when one of the Waymos encounters an unusual event, that is information that all of the Waymos out there are able to take advantage of. So all of them improve based on that experience.
And so going back to the point off the top, is Waymo's strategy simply to expand and then solve the issues later? Because as they expand, they're getting more of that knowledge. Every little mile driven informs the entire hive mind, I guess.
Right. I think that it's done being very sensibly. They are not expanding to all of the cities at the same time. There is a fairly measured rollout schedule, one city at a time, and they are mapping all of the cities. And the robo taxis are only able to drive within a service area that's well mapped and well understood. But you do have to drive more, and you do have to drive in different situations and different streets and different driving cultures, even to encounter the different edge cases.
Now, in May, Waymo issued a recall to address vehicles that were driving into flooded roadways. They've issued now, I think, 3 recalls since December. Why is rain still such a hard thing to deal with in 2026?
Well, it comes down to the capabilities of the sensors. Well, the Waymos have cameras, radars, and lidars. And lidars use laser lights to send out a beam, and it comes back and it measures how far that object was from which the light bounced back. But at the speed of light, the world is basically frozen. So it can come back from a raindrop as well, which is very close to the car. And so the LiDAR has this depth fuzziness, and you just can't figure out where everything is. And the LiDAR is a very important part of the sensor complement, because that's the one that builds the three-dimensional model of the world. The cameras tell you fine details. The cameras will read the stop sign, will have the shape of humans and cars, and understand sort of what the objects are. But if you're robbed of your sense of three-dimensionality, then it's going to make it much harder to drive.
Interesting. Is it a solvable problem, though?
It is a solvable problem. You know, Tesla actually takes the approach that they're not using LiDARs, because LiDARs are actually very expensive and come with certain disadvantages, like the ones I just mentioned. And they are coming from the assumption that humans just have 2 cameras, basically, and we do just fine. And of course, define just fine. We can't see backwards, we can't see sideways, we have to swivel, we have our limitations. But Tesla's philosophy is that a camera should be enough. And if you have 2 cameras or more, then you should be able to actually reconstruct the three-dimensional world visually from the visual cues. It just takes a lot more computational power and a lot more data. So then you have to train a separate model that constructs the three-dimensional world from the visual input. So as computational capabilities increase and as sensors are getting better, these problems are going to go away.
Fascinating. Now, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety warned last month that the monitoring systems that we have, the data collection that we currently have on AVs, is lacking. How much government oversight is there right now, and do we need to see more transparency for the public?
I think transparency is a great thing to have. I think the government could come in and demand more transparency, and that would keep these companies more honest. But I think perhaps the more important role of government is standardization around safety. So if a car finds itself in an emergency situation, rolling up on a crime scene or something like that, how could that be stopped? What should the police do? How could the police tell a self-driving car not to proceed? And all of those companies would have to abide by those standardized rules or commands, or perhaps they have an electronic device with them that they activate for the self-driving car to obey.
Rules of the road, if you will, standardized rules. Istvan Janyar is a software expert witness with Sidespin Group. Thanks so much for being on Generation AI.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for watching. You can watch every week, Wednesday night, 7 p.m. on AZF+. You can also find us anytime at azfamily.com/GenAI. We'll see you in the future.